everybody, to the second episode of the Inverted podcast, where we talk about products in security, abuse, quality, where everything is just a bit different. In the previous week, we gave you a high level overview, the previous episode, of what it is. And today we're going to dive in the invisible line together with my friend Tom, Dario, and Dana. And before we go into each of them, you can find all of us on LinkedIn. Feel free to connect to us, send us messages. We're happy to respond. And if you ever have a subject or you want to join us for a conversation like this, just reach out to one of us. So the invisible line. The problem with inverted products like security or quality is that you don't really know how much badness is out there. Because if you would know, then if you see a criminal, then you take them down. If you see some abuse, you take it down. Which means that you only know what you see. We call that the visible line. So when you're running your product, you have a graph with a visible line that just shows what you know, but it doesn't show what is really out there. We just don't know that. And that makes inverted products really different from other products where you can just measure all the users and then say which one of those went in or not, etc. And in a normal product, if that exists, if the line goes up, normally it's good. And if the line goes down, normally it's bad, or whatever you're optimizing. But the direction at least shows the performance. With the invisible line, it's not. And I want to start with you, Dario. This line can go up. So let's say I'm catching criminals, and tomorrow or the week after, the number of criminals we find is going up. Well, what does that mean?
Yeah, it's a really good question to understand that invisible line. Like, why is the line going up not necessarily a bad thing? And it is not, because you need to build a source of truth of how much badness is happening on your platform. Like, how many bad activities are taking place. It could be account compromise. It could be attempted exploits of known vulnerabilities. It could be spam, impersonation, abuse, any type of harm that you identify. You need to measure it in one way. And if a team measures it, they get better and better at doing that. And that sometimes means that the curve is going up, because you're getting better. Either you're getting better at detecting something that you were already detecting before, but maybe you only detected half of it or 80% of it, or there's a new activity going on your platform, because attackers, as we know, they change their behavior. And if they change their behavior, you'll see new badness, new harm happening on the platform. So those are success moments for teams as much as any others. It's just for a inverted products team, it's detecting bad things that have happened before.
So the line going up is not necessarily bad. And when the line goes down, Dana, is that good then, or?
Well, when you're a security PM, you learn quickly to not be too cocky or overconfident in your measurements and what you project, because going down doesn't necessarily mean that you've stopped and the bad actor has walked away. It could be multiple things. It could be they've changed their attacks and are avoiding your detections now. It could be that there's a problem with your protection systems and there's issues that you need to dig in. It could also mean that they've moved away. Like, if your protections are for account compromise, they might have moved over to creating fraudulent accounts and using those, because what we find is it's kind of like whack-a-mole, whereas you add cost and make it hard for them to use compromised accounts, the bad actors might then change their MO to start using fraudulently created accounts. Then when you figure that out and start tamping down on that, all of a sudden it costs too much for creating fraudulent accounts, so they use compromised accounts. So it really is something that you need to look at and assess and reassess and continually refine your metrics so you know exactly how you are doing it in protection security systems.
Yeah, and I think this invisible line doesn't only go for security abuse, it also is for like ML quality. You don't know how many errors you're missing, or it could be for infra stability. You don't know how many things things you got away from. And what you're saying is that, Dario, you're saying, well, the line going up doesn't need to be bad. You might be measuring more. You might be getting closer to the invisible line. And what you're saying is, Dana, the visible line going down doesn't necessarily mean it's good, because you might be going further away from the invisible line, or they might have shifted somewhere else. And that gives us, as professionals that build, sell, and manage these types of products, an interesting challenge when we talk about strategy in our leadership. And I want to go to you, Tom, because from your experience, you see a lot of conversations between leaders and where they have to discuss about, what is the impact of our security project going to be, or rolling out passwordless, or deploying IAM or something like this. So how do you bring this difficulty into that conversation?
I think it affects the conversation in two main ways. If I take it from kind of like, the let's say the board or the non-specialist view, I think when you talk about the line going up, as Dario was mentioning, one of the things that creates kind of like is like an implicit investment case, right, for your product. Because if the line is going up, you have certainty that there is a gap between what it is that you're able to detect and what it is that is able potentially to affect the organization, right? So that creates kind of like an investment case to say we are not yet where we need to be. And whatever that implies for kind of the functionality or the scale or the complexity of your product, then it just must be better, right? In some way or other, speaking from a non-specialist perspective. The other thing that is interesting, and this steps like maybe slightly outside of the kind of sole product manager view, but speaking more holistically, as we know, identity security, cybersecurity in general is a holistic discipline in a lot of ways. One of the things that a kind of a rising invisible line also implies is that for a lot of people, what they will look at that and think is, well, is there a step left available to us prior to the point that these attacks can be exploited? So if let me take an example of an invisible line that we're seeing, a lot of password spray attacks.
For those listening that don't know, could you quickly explain what a password spray attack is?
A password spray attack is when you try lots and lots of different passwords in the hope of getting one right.
For one account or for many accounts?
It can be run at scale for multiple accounts. It can be on a single account on a targeted basis. It can be leveraging either a known set of breach credentials, or it can be leveraging what we call a dictionary attack, which is exactly what it sounds like. And a lot of products will have kind of built-in kind of safety and anti-abuse features to detect and stop password spray attacks, like the ones that you gentlemen will be intimately familiar with. Right. But if you also look at this from kind of like a holistic perspective, one of the things you might say is, okay, well, we are not yet we have not yet kind of breached the invisible line in terms of how many password spray attacks are potentially affecting our infrastructure. Maybe instead of trying to detect all of these, we take a step left and we have mandatory MFA on all of our accounts.
So you're saying number one, the line moving helps with the investment case.
Yes.
And the other one is like, it also gives us a hint of completely moving. So we take a complete line out of the board, because if we do MFA, password spray goes away basically.
Essentially. So step left is the popular terminology, right? That you kind of come back into kind of the development of your downstream services and products. And instead of at the end of the chain, delivering a fit for purpose functionality with security as an afterthought, whereby, a product, for example, that detects password sprays comes in, then instead you step left and you say, where in the point of development here can we actually prevent at source these attacks? Dana?
Just going along with what you were saying and kind of drilling down a little, when I got into security and product management, everything was about detection. Attack happened, adversary got in, how many of those happened? And when we were at Microsoft, we purposely said, hey, like, our focus is not on detection. Our focus is shift left on prevention. And so we want to stop the attacks, and we want to know those numbers of what we've blocked, because ultimately that's our goal. It's not how much we detect, it's how much we can prevent. And so you really, things are slightly different when if you're conveying the invisible line based on if it was prevention or detection, because detection, if you're promoting the detection numbers or talking about the detection numbers, there's actually bad things that are happening to users when they're detected. When you're talking about prevention, you actually block the attack from happening. You need to know both, because you need to know what got through, but you need to be precise in what you're talking about. And for us, our goal, our drive, everything we did was to shift left to prevent attacks rather than detect it. So if we had a great new detection that we spun up, our goal was to move that to real time so that the detection could prevent the attack.
Dario?
Yeah, I mean, I have a bit of a pet peeve with the statement preventing attacks. Like, attacks are not initiated by the receiving end, so you can't prevent them. You can prevent making attack being successful. And it sounds like a technicality, but I think the number of attacks, they are very much out of the control of you as a platform. I mean, yeah, you could be unsuccessful and not interesting and have no users, then you don't get attacked. But
Attacks,
in general, it's out of your control. Like, sometimes it's more in the control of the holidays, bank holidays in certain countries than in any other things. I think it's really having a robust and mature detection discipline. It could be a team or specialist or process. It really allows you to know what works and what doesn't, because we're here in a space where we're always dealing with trade-off. Yeah, we could force everybody to have a long password, multi-factor authentication on everything, and have a hardware security key. And then we would solve a lot of the problems, but probably nobody would be able to log in anymore, and then the business is also not happy. So detection has not only the capacity of feeding the protection or like the team building, preventing attacks from being successful, it also has the capacity of informing us what happens at a lower cost. How can we lower the cost of prevention? It's not always clear.
So it's interesting. You're both saying kind of similar things. Like, Danny, you're saying preventing is always better than detecting, because when you detect, something has already happened. And you're saying, Dario, like, well, we need detection or else we don't know what's working, right? That means that when the visible line goes down, prevention went better. And when the visible line went up, prevention maybe did a less good job. And when I say prevention, I would say successful prevention, to make sure that we talk about it correctly. I have another question for you all. We have the invisible line and we have the visible line. Potential attacks are very hard to estimate, right? Not everybody that signs in and fails a password challenge is an attacker. They might just be me with morning fingers, or it could be whatever, right, before I have my coffee. So it's extremely hard to estimate. And then preventing successful attacks is the golden standard. Nobody experiences anything bad anymore. But we will have a distance always between the invisible line and the visible line. And for me, the objective is not to draw the visible line down, but to make them converge, to try and make sure that the distance between them becomes as small as possible, so that we know if we have, I'm just going to say a number, 100 per day, it's not 1,000 or 2,000, and we're excited if it goes down to 50, right? We need to make sure that these come down. So do you have thoughts about how to...
real numbers.
Yeah, I'm just saying 100, but I'm just wondering, do you have thoughts about how we can estimate where the invisible line is? Have you seen methods or methodologies or things that people do? Maybe start with you, Tom. Have you seen it?
I mean, one of the things that we do, generally speaking, and one of the value adds of kind of engaging with large consultancies, is that you often do a lot of peer exchange and peer review, right? Mm-hmm. So, like on a SOC CM level, one of the things that we can frequently facilitate is like within a given market, within a given like segment, like financial services or whatever, we can align for kind of like, are you seeing the same patterns that we are seeing in terms of deepfake attacks, or are you seeing the same that we're seeing in terms of DDoS or so on? And that's one of the kind of, let's say, somewhat cruder ways, but still more effective than nothing, of kind of establishing, are we within what you would call a normal distribution for what we're detecting, for what is the the visible line for us? Or is there someone doing it better, which implies potentially a higher ceiling on the invisible line that we were previously aware of?
So you're talking about comparing notes between organizations to see where you are, and Dana, you also had an idea here.
Yeah, so we used to use like false positive layers and filtering layers to try to get down to the truth. And what we do is we would use, previous activities of good users versus bad actors to try to filter the data so we get the true picture. And something Tom said, I just want to go back again. He's like, talk to other companies or organizations to figure out if things are correct. You can't say it enough. You need to continually look at these things that you're measuring and looking at to see if it's working correctly or there are improvements. It really is an iterative process to get better and better. And anybody who does this is going to start off, your measurements are going to suck. It's like you just need to take a stand and put something together and then continually iterate on these to improve your measurements because it's really hard to figure out the invisible line and where it actually is. And so, so we used like other algos and other methods on top of the data to try to clean it up so we knew exactly where we stood.
I want to go back to something actually that we talked about last week a little bit that's triggered by that, Dana, which is a question I asked you guys around like standardization of tooling and like the ability to kind of, let's say, customize detections or kind of customized filters, attributes, alerts, whatever. And that the kind of view that we had in the room was basically from a PM perspective, at least from a product management perspective, you want to limit the kind of room for customization on behalf of the organization, right? So that it's a more simple product, it's a more like universally consumed, supported or so product. But that's also something that by implication then also means that the more organizations which are deploying a standardized product with the standardized detections means that it should in theory become easier to compare apples with apples in terms of defining the effectiveness of the product versus the invisible line. Dario?
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. The question is a bit, to what level of perfection and alignment can you get that? I mean, I'm using an example from a few years ago when companies started to disclose what the user base was that used deterministic two-factor authentication. So how many of their users enabled 2FA on their account? And you started to get vastly different numbers between Google, Twitter, Facebook, Pinterest, Microsoft, consumer accounts, Apple consumer accounts, Apple managed accounts, and all of those things. And then people started to think, well, they are much better because they have a higher rate, and they are much worse because they have a lower rate. And then if you dig deeper, I started to notice we're not all talking about the same baseline. Like some people spoke about monthly active users, others about daily active, others about active users, whatever that means. Is it 6 months, 12 months, 15 years? And others talked about percentage of user base. So I think really one of the starts when talking between either broader set of people like public or closed groups, closed circles on companies is we'll start to establish definitions. Like what is an active user for us? And what is enabling 2FA for us? Because like we've discussed that in this group before, like sometimes some companies say everybody has 2FA. Well, is it deterministic 2FA or is it opportunistic 2FA? And so like there's really a need to start to have a shared lingo and talk about how do we measure those things. Because if we're not measuring the same cohort of people over the same number of time space, then we're breaking the whole conversation and it means nothing. So I think before maybe standardizing tooling, standardized language would really help us in industry. But we often struggle in large organizations to standardize language within the organization, and that just shows how hard it is to do that.
Dana?
wholeheartedly agree. You know, like active users, is it like hours per month they spent, or is it how many times they visited? Like, there's no baseline. It's probably different between every company. So one of the things that comes out of this is you have to be clear about it. The other thing, Dario, that I was thinking about is like when you introduce new security systems and things like that, and you're looking at other companies' numbers or your numbers, are you taking out the bad actors activity out of those numbers and only showing valid users? Because we saw like way back in time when advanced security was just coming up that it would be a bad actor that compromises account and then puts on advanced security so the valid user couldn't get in. And so the people that were using the advanced security were all the bad actors trying to keep a foothold on their account, right? And so you really need to, when I talk about false positive layers, that's another thing that you need to pull out of your measurements is like, how much are you attributing to bad actors versus good users and valid users? And what does a good user look like in your ecosystem?
Let's, Dario, before we go to you, Tom needs to disconnect soon. Do you want to give a final question or thought that we can discuss after you leave? And of course, you'll be one of our faithful listeners, so you can hear our response afterwards.
No, I'm looking forward to the other things that you guys have on the agenda for this afternoon. I wish I could join for it, but
no worries.
Unfortunately, this podcast doesn't yet pay my bills.
Yeah.
All right. Have a good weekend, guys.
I'm going to just quickly summarize the inverted. Sorry, Dario, you wanted to add something as well. I just see your hand.
Yeah, very briefly. I try to keep it very short. I think one of the examples is also effort. How much effort does an organization put into solving a particular harm? I remember a few years ago where there were reports that about 90-something% of the reports for explicit child imagery came from one company. And people thought, well, that means that this platform is the cesspool of child exploitation imagery. And then the other companies started to catch up, and that's just an indication of not everyone invests or can invest the same amount of effort into a specific problem. That's that invisible line over the industry that we just don't know. And I think if you start to compare companies in account compromise or child exploitation or spam or so, you really also have to understand very much how much are they investing in measuring that. Even if they report the right numbers, they just, not everybody has the same maturity. That's all I wanted to add. I always find this discrepancy an interesting example.
Yeah, and I think you're totally right, and every company is unique, and if we don't speak the same language, it's hard to compare. And there's one point where in the US, when the GSM network, for those of you who still remember, that was rolling out, you had these commercial fights between Verizon and AT&T where they would show a map of the US, and they would show with a colored shape what they would cover. And every week or 2 weeks, they would come up with new maps saying, oh, we now cover this, that the other one doesn't yet, right? And it was really great for the consumer because these companies were actively, in a race to cover all of the US with cell phone towers and to get the signal. Whereas if we start all publishing, let's say we have so many per day hijacked, you have so many per day, you have so many per day, other than the fact that even if we define it correctly, it still might be, we have totally different detection algorithms, totally different attack services, so, and in the end, the only thing users are going to learn is that, these are scary products, I shouldn't use them. And they might, they might hinder innovation. So, the last thing has been said. I want to summarize the invisible line, and we also want to do sort of the news, what we've heard over the last week. So we talked about the invisible line and the visible life, and then the distance between them, right? And that if the detection systems make the visible line, and if it goes up, it doesn't mean the team did bad. You might just be detecting more, and it's actually good. And if it goes down, it doesn't mean the problem is under control. You might just be missing stuff. And what we want to is for these lines to slowly converge, so that hopefully by the end you'll be in this space, right, where both lines are driving down. You do these occasional tests by talking to colleagues, or you do false positive studies, or you do maybe you do some manual reviews or something else to sort of find out where the invisible line is. and then you see that they're close together. And I hope for everybody that's working on any inverted product that's the case. There's one other problem with the whole idea of detection, right? If a team takes an objective on detection, let's say how many server anomalies do we detect, or how many bad images do we detect, or how many attacked accounts, is the prevention and the detection teams are trying to pull the same line in the opposite ways. So it could be that you say, okay, I'm going to double the number of images that I detect, or increase the percentage or what have you. And then there's another team that's building a prevention flow that's actually trying to lower it. And so then it becomes really complex when you're standing in front of your leadership to explain, oh, I did a lot this year, but the number is the same because X, Y, Z, right? So I think there's a concept of damage, and I would love in one of these weeks for us to talk about, because that's the metric that would move consistently in the same direction. And Dana's already, so let's not give the scoop now. But yeah, that's definitely a challenge I would love to talk about next time as well, both. Yeah, let's do the news. There's two stories that we've sort of noticed, all of us, that we wanted to talk about. Let me first start with the story from Troy Hunt. So for those of you who don't know, Troy Hunt is the creator of a site called Have I Been Pwned? It's like, I think, the largest queryable database where you can put your email account and it will tell you if it's been found on the dark web or any of the breaches that are known to this website. And then something funny happens, right? Does one of you want to summarize? Dario, do you know the case? Do you want to summarize it, or should I?
Please, you do. I don't know it in detail. I know I would probably mix up the sequence.
Yeah, and all of this is public because he's blogging about it extensively, which is also what I think we really like about this openness from it. So what happened is that he was phished for his MailChimp, and then the attackers went into his MailChimp and then extracted a whole bunch of, I think, 6,000 email addresses, including people that have unsubscribed, that MailChimp didn't delete. And that's a whole different story. And it was really interesting because the way he responded was that he basically was very open. As soon as he knew about it, he sat down and wrote a blog post, I think even on his phone, and started explaining it all to people. And he kept updating it. And there's a few things that went wrong that he admitted. We can go into that in a moment. But there was another case, Dana, I think you've been following that a little bit, that didn't respond as open as Troy did, right? Do you want to give a sort of summary of what happened there?
Sure. So what you're talking about is the Oracle compromise of their cloud systems, or their what they call classic cloud system. And bad actors leaked some of their data, and basically Oracle started out denying the whole thing and saying that they were wrong, and outside investigators and researchers were looking at it and saying, like, hey, there's a problem here. And it turned out that yes, Oracle, what they call classic cloud, got compromised. At least that's what we know now. I mean, I'm sure there's going to be even more and more and more. But over a course of many weeks, there's continued denial, and then eventually Oracle came back and said that they were actually compromised. And a lot of it has to do with semantics in the way they announced it. And they're like, Oracle Cloud didn't get compromised, but Oracle Classic Cloud got compromised. And like, having done incident response and building these comms, like, we always looked at it and said, like, a couple of things. One is, like, we always want to make sure we're as transparent as possible, because there's real companies getting hurt in this. Like, your users, your customers have things that happen that they need to know, they need to assess their business. And so we want to be as transparent as possible. And also, when you're dealing with security breaches, the systems are so complex. There's so many different logs everywhere and so many indicators that you're dealing with, like, trillions and trillions of log lines. And you don't know back in history how far the initial compromise happened. And so things are really complex. You're going to start finding things over time. And so you can't deny, you should say like we don't have indications so far, but you can't say like nothing happened. So trying to be transparent as possible and not ruling things out are the the most important things, and then continually updating your customers with your most recent findings, and making sure that they understand that you're doing everything that you can to prevent this. And not Oracle wasn't the only one. Like at the same time period, Checkpoint also had a similar issue where they released a statement like, "Oh, we think like 4 customers were compromised." And meanwhile, the researchers looking at it and the bad actors released like massive, like a huge list of user accounts of like admin accounts and pictures of admin sites that, and they're like, "Oh, how does this doesn't line up with what the company is saying publicly?" And so I think that's where you need to be, you need to be responsible to your customers. It's first and foremost. And so be as transparent as possible. And then both you and your customer and the outside need to know that these things are like, there's so much that goes into investigating, because it could be some esoteric system that got compromised that you have spotty logs on. Maybe that's not your best practices, but that you need to dig in, and it might take like a week to run a query on that system to get the actual data that you need. And so these things are evolving, so you need to acknowledge that so far you haven't found anything, but there's something open. Going back to like a security, thing that everybody talks about. If we talk about in the industry zero trust and zero trust protection. One of the things in zero trust is you always assume breach so that you know how to respond. It's the same thing with these security incidents. Like you should assume something might have happened that you don't know about yet, and so make sure you're transparent about that.
So 2 very different responses, right? One immediately going out and blogging about it as he's discovering it, maybe in this almost real time, and the other one being much more complex. Dario, have you been in any of these situations, and how have you helped maybe customers or teams deal with this?
Yeah. Like just to reiterate, those 2 very different responses are somehow also related to what are those organizations. I mean, Have I Been Pwned? Hunt is a relatively small organization. I don't know if he employs people. I'm pretty sure he's not traded at NASDAQ. Oracle on the other side, huge company. But then still I'm surprised how they can come out with absolute statements. And I think that's really where in my experience, you can benefit from an inverted product manager in your team. Like if you're looking at more traditional product teams, that some of them are responsible for sign up, other are responsible for engagement, for payment, for ads, for growth. And then you have that one inverted PM that really can be the one helping in order to give people an approach and help them when incidents like this happen. Also to stay humble around, we don't know what we don't know yet. We don't know yet what happened. We need to figure that out. How do we approach this? And then also, how do you communicate with the rest of the organization? Like obviously in large organizations, you have a team for everything. So you will have to communicate with a legal team, with a PR team, with a team feeding information to leadership. But even in a smaller organization, let's use that superpower of that inverted product people or manager, and let them help to create clarity before you start to communicate, and always communicate based on the clarity you have. I mean, the fact that a publicly traded company can make a statement of, well, nothing bad happened after such a short time is baffling to me, because there must be plenty of lawyers raising their hands and saying, do we really know yet? So it's a culture in a large organization. It's a culture thing. And in the smaller organization, it's one of the benefits of having an inverted PM that then can take those roles and help the growth PM and help the monetization PM navigate these types of behaviors. And I've done this in the past, and I always enjoyed this, and I think it's a good learning moment for everybody within the organization.
Yeah, and I guess also those instances give some adrenaline, right, Dana? I'm not sure if you have been in them, but
yes, I wanted to say though that it's kind of interesting as you get into like being a security PM or an inverted PM. Talking about this publicly is kind of uncomfortable. Now I am like semi-retired, retired, like, so I'm not involved with any of these companies, but we always used to say when we saw other companies dealing with this, like when I was at like big companies, is like, don't throw stones in glass houses. Like, it's going to happen to you. You shouldn't take someone's bad fortune and try to use it for marketing or, for profit. And so it's kind of uncomfortable to talk about. Now, when I was in identity, one of our competitors was like, their salespeople would go crazy and like throw out these compromises and say, if you used our solution, this wouldn't happen. And they got their, the reverse happened to them where they got owned like a year or two later. And it's just reinforced that like, hey, it's good learning. It's good that we talk about it so that people can learn about it. But it's still, for me, it's kind of uncomfortable because I try not to, how you handle a response is one thing, but the fact that a company got compromised is like it's going to happen in some degree to everyone, and you need to acknowledge that as well. So I just wanted to mention that's
it's fair, because when we were seeing these stories, Dana, I was also thinking we need to speak respectfully, etc. And I think it's really fair. And I personally really liked how Troy handled it and how open he was, and he maybe went the other way around where he immediately spoke up with, and maybe later he had to change it, but as you said, Dana, that's a one-person initiative, so he could do it. And is one thing is these escalations do give us a really great opportunity to see a hint of the invisible line. It's all of a sudden, it's someone open security, you can see it, and they give us an opportunity to then sit down once everything calms down, the response has been done, the damage has been undone as far as possible, everybody is back into normal, then you can go down and sit down and really go into all of the systems and see, now, can we find more of this stuff and can we get ahead of it?
Right, and can you make detections for
exactly, and then preventions afterwards. Yeah,
do that in the future.
So we are getting to the end of our second episode of the Inverted PM, the Inverted podcast. As always, it's a really great pleasure to be with you, Dario, my master of passkeys, and Dana, my always the one who showed me the US and Seattle, and looking forward to the next time. We have so many different subjects that we want to talk about, and if you're listening, you can find us on LinkedIn and reach out to us if you want to engage, and we're looking forward to seeing you all in the next one.
Thanks.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Cheers.